Now, when feeding fish, it's really important that we know what a skinny or a fat fish is. So if you look at the position of the gills on the fish, and then if your fish have a little bit of a belly exceeding the gills, that's very good. If the fish is going in from the gills, as a generalization, that means your fish is underweight. But if it's bulbing out from the thickness of the gills, then you probably find the fish is being overfed. Now, in general, underfeeding is much safer than overfeeding. You're going to cause the fish a lot more territorial problems if the fish, or nutritional problems, if the fish is overfed than underfed. Their immune system will be more tolerant of underfeeding than overfeeding, depending on the extremity. And same with the sharks. If you look under the gills, if you look at from the gills to the anus, if there's a little bit of a belly, I'm really happy with that. With the sharks, you'll often see a fold underneath the belly when they're a little bit on the thin side. So you do need to be watching your fish on a regular basis, and you do need to be altering what you're doing according to what you're seeing. And other than that, you just have to be patient, because you can make small changes and then you want to give it at least a month before you decide whether your change has made any difference. So at the moment, these fish have been fed sort of 20, 30 minutes ago, and I'm still seeing food on the bottom. I really don't want it that. So there's a little bit too much food going in, and the weight of these fish, these are very healthy, happy, thriving fish, but they're definitely on the fat side. I'd rather see them thin out. Now the sharks are definitely on the thin side. So I'd be trying to feed some nice sort of prawn and meaty foods. But what I would be doing is trying to push some of these pellets into the flake, into the flesh. So with your sharks and your stingrays, if we could push some pellets through the flesh of your prawn, that means that they won't need anywhere near as much food. So if you look at this big epaulet under here, he's quite fat. There's a beautiful stingray here. So what I'd really request is that we get our prawn or our whitebait or whatever we're feeding, we push through the flesh of the prawn or the pellet or whatever, some Dainichi or some probiotics from New Life Spectrum. And then what happens with a predator is a predator can process massive amounts of protein, but it's trying to get vitamins and things that it's lacking. So what we don't want to do is go feeding heaps of protein to our fish, otherwise they're just going to poop a lot. Then with our herbivores, they will process huge amounts of green stuffs trying to get the protein. But at the same time, we don't want to give them huge amounts of green stuff. So food like your nori and your seaweed, I'm very happy that you're feeding that, but I do not want it to be a major part of the diet. It's wonderful for cleaning the fish out, but they actually don't process green stuffs all that well, and it's not at all economical as far as the amount of waste is concerned. The other thing is that we really want to be looking at how much food the fish needs, and we don't want them overfeeding, because the fish will only absorb a certain amount of nutrients within a feed. Now, if you feed them too much, then they're going to poo a lot more. If you feed them the right amount and of the right foods, then they don't actually need anywhere near as much food. So with your super high quality foods like your Dainichi and your New Life Spectrum, you're only needing tiny amounts. But if you are going to rely on either algae for your herbivores or fish for your predators, then you actually need to feed them large amounts, because they're going to have to process large amounts to get what they don't want. So what we don't want is excess food. We want to make sure all the food is eaten, and we want to look at the bellies of the fish. Now, it's very normal to have a fat fish, and it's very normal to have a skinny fish, but we're particularly worried about the average fish, because we don't want the average fish to be fat or thin. We want your average fish to have just a nice belly, so we're not putting extra nutrients into the tank. Because what will happen next is if there is extra nutrients in the tank, then we're going to really struggle with the coral, because the coral need a low nutrient environment. Now, the corellas and soft corals, they're going to be much more forgiving. So they're a very good choice. Your bubbles are one of the better of the stony corals, but the stony corals are the ones that will probably go first. So we've got a bubble there, we've got a goniopora over there. So they're the ones that we're really going to have to watch. And the other thing is that we want to keep our rock, in a perfect world, we want our rock that lovely purpley pink colour. Now, if we're calcium, carbonate, pH, magnesium, if all these levels are right and our nutrient levels are not too high, we should be getting this lovely coralline algae growth on the rocks. Now, if we're not getting this lovely coralline algae growth on the rocks, then we do need to have a look at either make sure our calcium level or something isn't too low, and we definitely want to check that our nutrient levels are not too high. Because if our phosphate or nitrate's too high, we're not going to get this nice pink. And ultimately, the colour of your rock will have some sort of governance on what your water quality was like last month, and the colour of your rock next month is going to be very much influenced by your water quality now. So as far as the aquarium's concerned, what really matters is what's happening. So if you notice the rock slowly getting more pink, then we're really happy. That's what we want. If you notice it going slowly more grey, then we need to make a change, because that's what we don't want. So the trends and comparing videos is also really great. It's really good to look at videos from months ago, and even if you post them on Facebook or your YouTube channel or whatever you're going to do, that way you can look back and you can compare what you're seeing to how it is, because it's the trends or the way it's going that makes the difference. Now, the other thing I just want to point out is these things. So these are Aiptasia. So these Aiptasia can be like weeds. So if you don't mind the look of these and you don't mind them growing absolutely everywhere, then that's fine. But if you do notice these things starting to get too predominant, there's one there and one there, then there is a fish called a stripey. It's an Australian native fish, and you can whack one of those in, and that will usually be very efficient at culling your Aiptasia if that was to become a problem. So there is some risk with them with other corals, but usually they're pretty good. And then if they did do the job and they got rid of your Aiptasia, and if they did start to go after other corals, you could look at removing them. So all in all, I'm looking at a very healthy tank full of fish, a little bit on the fat side, and I would like to really be monitoring the colour of this rock over time. And then once again, if the corals keep doing very well, that's good. On the other hand, if over time we're not as happy with the corals, we're going to have to really watch that temperature, and we're going to have to look at the light settings to make sure that the light settings are as high as they need to be. The other thing I would just sort of say as well, little fish are very economical with their nutrients, whereas larger fish are less economical with their nutrients. So I would not, besides maybe the odd stripey, I probably would not add more fish to this tank. I think this is enough fish for this tank. And the other thing to be aware of is obviously the fish have to grow. So we need to allow room for these fish to grow, because ultimately we don't really want more waste going in there than there is now. So we're going to be able to be more efficient with the waste by just cutting down the food a little bit. But I would hesitate to put any other fish in unless there was absolutely a reason for putting the fish in, because we got to allow for these guys to grow. And ultimately, the more fish you have, the more maintenance and water changes you need to prepare to do. Also, this water's a little bit cloudy, and that's fairly common after a heavy feed. So I'd probably rather reduce the feed so the water's not at all getting cloudy, even straight after the feed. There's so much to see in here.